moment our fellow geeks, dweebs, nerds, and other unfortunates have been fervently waiting for has finally arrived. It's time for TMI, Confessionals of the Nerd Kind. And now, your hosts, Jeff Nerfherder Chandler, Jim Kaiju Baker, and Christina Yojimbo Henry. You can continue. And now, let's get on with the show. Here is TMI.
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Good morning.
To another fun-packed episode. A little less fun-packed because Jeff is not with us today.
Yes, I apologize in advance. You're probably going to hear a lot of my voice because these are two movies that I'm extremely enthusiastic about.
I really don't think that we've covered Get Out before, regardless.
Oh, you don't think you have?
No, I have no memory of discussing this at length with anyone. I've seen it before. You know, we've all seen it before, and I think that's where Jeff and I were thinking that we covered it. But I don't think we did, unless, you know, Coagula came and put somebody else into my head.
Yeah, I mean, if you did, it was, like I said last week, it was before I came on board. So, you know, I'm sure it was very early on if you guys
I'm
did
sure it
cover
was. And if anybody can fact check that, please feel free. But since this came out in 2017 and we didn't start till 2018, I don't think we covered it. So this is the first time. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you guys did it as a second feature and you just don't recall.
You know, there's stuff that I would have talked about that I don't think was ever brought to the table. And so along with Get Out, because that's the big, you know, that'll put bums in seats, I think, because everybody knows Get Out, or they should, even if they haven't seen it. So as Christina said at the end of last week's episode, you haven't seen Get Out or Polite Society. They both kind of hinge on surprises. So it's best that you stop now and go and watch before you listen to us.
Yes, because otherwise you're going to be upset with us for spoiling these two movies, which we are going to do. Yeah,
we will. You did see Polite Society before this past week, but I didn't. But again, I was politely surprised that they fit so well together, it seems.
Yeah. Yes. And even weirdly, when we get to what else we did this week, the thing I did this week also fits in. So,
okay.
Before we start talking about the movies, I do have some news for us. Standing in for Jeff, who is out this week. So, the first thing is something you may or may not be aware of. I'm very excited for this. The distributor Neon is re-releasing Park Chan-wook's Old Boy in theaters for the 20th anniversary. I'm assuming that after they do this re-release that they're going to do a nice, beautiful Blu-ray release because this film isn't widely available right now. I actually already had this written down as news, but then yesterday I went to see Nope in 70mm at the Music Box, and they actually showed the preview for the re-release. So now I'm even more excited than I was. If people are not familiar with this, it is the second in Park Chan-wook's Vengeance trilogy. The first one, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, then Old Boy, and then Lady Vengeance. It is gory. It is action-packed. It is one of the most intense movies you'll ever see, but it's also beautiful. Comes out August 16th.
So some may be confused because there is a remake out there, an Americanized remake with Josh Brolin, I believe. It didn't raise interest in the original at that time when the remake came out.
It might have. I mean, Old Boy was kind of an instant classic when it came out. It was definitely, cult film. I don't know that the American version of Old Boy was successful enough to raise interest in the
Yeah, well,
original.
but once something is announced that it's coming out, then whether or not it's successful or before it's even released, whoever the distributor is of the original might say, "Oh, I'm putting this out too," But I guess that didn't happen with the
Yeah.
original Old Boy.
No shade against Josh Brolin, but like I just generally find Americanized remakes of Asian films to be inferior. You guys know how I feel about Infernal Affairs and The Departed, amongst
No, no, no,
others.
no, no, no. The Departed.
So don't watch the Josh Brolin movie. Please, watch the re-release in theaters when it comes out, August 16th. And then, yeah, I'm hoping that Neon will do a beautiful Blu-ray release. The print looks nice. I'll say that much.
Mm.
So the next thing is going to talk about some labor disputes here because they're going to affect whether or not we have movies to watch next year. As people may or may not know, SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Guild, has made the decision to strike after being unable to come to terms with the studio execs for their union. This is pretty significant because the writers are already striking. They've been striking for, I think, about 80 days now. The studios haven't even approached the writers about terms. And honestly, what the actors want and what the writers want are pretty similarly aligned, although writers have some other things that they're concerned about, like mini rooms and things like that. But primarily, the terms seem to be about streaming residuals and the kind of inability of streamers to disclose their numbers on these shows, which appear very successful, and AI is a huge concern for both unions. In particular, for writers, it's because they're worried about AI generated scripts, and then basically studios will be like, well, we'll have AI generate a script and we'll have one person come in and basically clean it up and make it sound human. And then we won't have to pay a whole team of writers, who, by the way, don't get paid a lot anyway. And for SAG-AFTRA, the concern is that the studios will scan their images and use them in perpetuity without compensation. And the reason why they're worried about this is because, according to Duncan Crabtree Ireland, who was the negotiator for SAG-AFTRA, he said they propose that our background performers should be able to be scanned, get paid for one day's pay, and their company should own that scan, their image, their likeness, and should be able to use it for the rest of eternity in any project they want with no consent and no compensation. The standard pay for a union background job is $187 for the day. So basically, studios were saying, we'll pay you less than $200 and we get to keep your image forever and we get to do whatever we want with it.
So then they can then use them for subsequent movies. So just use them live in the flesh for one day, for one movie, and then forever on after.
Yes.
They don't have to employ anyone.
Yes. And the thing is, like, a lot of people might think, oh, well, this is just like rich people fighting rich people. But like the unions are mostly made up of people who make less than $35,000 a year.
And I can understand why the studios would ignore the writers, but I'm just wondering if
you can understand why they would ignore writers.
Yes, because they have no respect for what they do. But now that the actors are involved, are their demands contingent on the writers getting what they want? Because it would seem that they should all be in solidarity.
They are all in solidarity, but the unions negotiate separately. However, the big thing for the studios right now is that if there is a SAG project, then SAG actors cannot promote it. So even stuff that's completed, they cannot go out and do press junkets and, go on Good Morning America and go to conventions and all this stuff. SAG actors cannot do that. And in fact, during the London premiere of Oppenheimer, with the understanding that the strike was probably going to happen, they moved up the premiere by an hour so that the actors could walk the red carpet, because they knew that during the movie that the strike was going to come down, and all of the actors walked out.
Wait, wasn't the strike announced at midnight?
Yeah, but they were in London. There
Okay, I
was
was
a
going to
time
say, so this
difference.
is such a super long movie that the movie started at like 7, and then 5 hours later.
So yeah, so the cast actually, they had already talked to Christopher Nolan. They were like, we're gonna walk out in solidarity with our union. He was like, cool, do what you have to do. And they all did that. So yeah, so no promoting projects for these actors. And that's a big deal for studios because they rely on like, the actors being out there glad handing. So I think
So for Florence Pugh, that's no big news whatsoever.
right. The other thing is, as you said, studios don't respect writers. Nobody respects writers. I say this as a writer. And there was an article that came out this week in Deadline, which caused quite a stir. You may or may not have seen this. It was sort of anonymous quotes from industry veterans. So take it with a grain of salt. We don't know who these people were or, how much information they might actually have. But an industry veteran said they're going to let the writers bleed out. Basically, that they want to not come to the table with the writers. They want this to reach like the holiday season. And when it gets to a point where people start to maybe lose their homes, then they want the writers to come to them begging. If this is true, there's no verified reporting, I guess. But if this is true, the stark and unrelenting cruelty of CEOs that make 8-figure salaries telling people that they can lose their homes because they want fair compensation for their jobs is outrageous.
So that's exactly why I'm so hoping that these actors' demands tie in with the writers getting what they want, because they can't as easily do that with a Florence Pugh, just to bring up a name that I just did, or Emily Blunt, or any of these other A-listers.
Right.
So now it might get serious for them. So of course we went through COVID, so there was a long period of no product, but that wasn't in the studio's hands. This is.
Right.
So they can stop this. It's within their hands. It's not an outside event.
Right. And I mean, let's talk about optics, right? Bob Iger, who is making $27 million a year right now as CEO of Disney, said that writers and actors had unrealistic demands. I mean, it just sounds a little tone deaf, Bob. Every company is like this. They always claim like the margins are thin and that they really can't pay labor. And, people expect too much, but it's very, very hard for people to say, I understand what you're saying when you can see the CEO compensation, when you can see what the stock price is. And ultimately, this is what it comes down to, right? This is not about thin margins or the cost of doing business or whether or not things are successful or whatever. It's about Wall Street. It's about, do their investors feel like they're making enough money, right? Investors are always the priority. It's never, making sure the people who provide your product are happy and well fed. And these streaming residuals are such a big bone of contention. If people don't understand what this is, it's very similar to songwriting royalties or book royalties, where basically you make a percentage of a rerun or a resell of your show. So like big shows like Friends back in the day, like they would get sold, for syndication, and these syndication deals would deliver money back to the actors, right? So it's not like you get paid one time, you get paid every time the thing reruns. And that's for the writers, the directors, everybody involved with the show. And with streaming, because streamers won't disclose their numbers, people don't have a clear idea of how many times these shows are being run. And because they don't have advertising, they just have subscriber numbers. Streamers are arguing that there's no way for them to determine exactly how much a show is making for a streamer. But you have to compensate people. I mean, if a show like Stranger Things is getting say 100 million views, right? Then people need to be compensated accordingly. They have to work out some kind of system for that, which would mean disclosing their numbers, which they're loath to do. They want to be super secretive about it, but I think they have to.
Because if they don't, they can continue to cry poverty.
Right.
And you think that the product that Hollywood is putting out is subpar now? Wait until AI starts writing the scripts to the movies.
Yeah.
Might already be happening with like Transformers and stuff. But...
So, I mean, that's big news, though. The fact that SAG is on strike along with the writers is the first time there's been a strike of both unions since 1960s when Ronald Reagan was head of SAG.
Wow.
And it's always the same argument. There's always the same pushback. And it's always about new technology. At the time, it was about television, and now it's about, a different kind of television, different kind of compensation. Several years ago, during the last writer strike, it was about DVD compensation, So it's about new technologies. If you can't afford labor, you don't deserve labor. That's all I'm saying. If you can't afford to pay people,
then your product suffers. So
right.
Hopefully the actors getting involved is going to bring a swift end to this.
I hope so. Because already, obviously, like certain shows were trying to go forward without writers, like shows that were already written, things like that. We're trying to like proceed and like do their get ready for the next seasons, but everything's come to a halt now.
So yes, we'll keep an eye on that. We have no choice, but because this directly affects us as well as every moviegoer out there.
And again, without the ability of SAG actors to promote already completed projects, studios can release stuff that they have, but nobody's out there, talking about it. So will audiences come out for movies that they don't even know exist?
Well, fingers crossed they'll do the right thing, even if they're forced into it with an armbar behind their back.
I mean, when I read that headline article, I was shocked that any executive would even say that they would allow people to lose their homes because they don't want to pay writers. I mean, I think it shows you how much writing is not valued.
Or just the fact that they're tone deaf in general. They're so above everybody else that they have no concept of how reality is out here with the rest of us.
Yeah. I can tell you as a writer, not a TV writer or a screenwriter, but as a novel writer, like writers don't really make money, okay? There's a few writers who make money. They have very big names, but mostly people just like make like a working class salary. And believe me, publishers are just like movie studios. They're always like, well, we really can't give you this and that, even though your numbers are good. The one good thing right now with publishing is that even if they don't give you a good advance up front, and believe me, they will do everything they can not to give you a good advance up front, is that royalty rates are pretty standard. So if your book sells well, you will make royalties. They can't fudge those numbers. So one advantage novel writers have right now.
All right, that's sobering news for all of us. Also, in sobering news, I am saddened to report that Jane Birkin has passed.
Oh.
Yeah, I just heard that this morning. For music fans, she was the muse of Serge Gainsbourg for many years and the mother of Charlotte Gainsbourg, and she was an actress in her own right as well.
And for fashion fans, the Hermes Birkin bag was created for her, which is probably the most desired handbag in the world.
Yeah, she was in her 70s. It said that her caregiver found her. And I'm not sure what exactly she was ill of or if it was just old age, but still, it seems young. So
yeah,
rest in peace, Jane Birkin. All right, do we have any other news?
Nope.
No,
we're going to be watching these strikes for the next few weeks.
All right. So one movie back in 2017 that was not affected by a strike of any kind, as far as I know, Get Out.
Yeah.
Written, produced, and directed by Jordan Peele. Co-produced, I should say. I don't want to give him complete 100% credit, but he wore 3 hats for this movie.
As he does.
Yeah. And this was his directorial debut. Was it
hmm
not? Yeah.
Yeah. If you listen to this show, you've heard me rave about Us and about Nope. I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peele. I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peele, actually going back to Key and Peele. And I am not a person who watches sketch shows, but I watched Key and Peele, and I still go back and rewatch Key and Peele, which has some of like the sharpest satire in, social satire.
Right. Well,
Uh,
Keegan-Michael Key is not a slouch in his own
yes,
right.
yes.
So put them two together. Yeah, the show is hilarious. The show is very funny and it's a classic.
And it has a lot of the things that are present here in Get Out. You can see him bringing some of that sensibility here. Um, you know, their comedy is Key and Peele's comedy is very confrontational, and I think this movie is very confrontational, although it tries to make it go down with humor.
Well, I think that the great thing about this is that it's a successful horror movie and it can
Yes,
be looked at
yes,
from that perspective. But if you're looking for deeper meaning, of course, that's here as well.
yes,
But I think key is that Jordan Peele is a huge horror fan. And
yes.
he knows the genre, which is obvious from watching this movie.
So both of these films that we're going to talk about have a kind of wackadoodle premise, like at the core of the movie that you have to get on board with. And it's sort of interesting to me because in light of Jordan Peele's successive work, the plot of Nope, in which there is a carnivorous alien, is actually probably the most plausible of the
Of the
three.
three,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So in terms of plausibility, right?
Yeah.
I actually accept this more than I did Us.
Mm.
So I'm like, when it gets to like crazy scientific surgical facts, I'm like, okay, I can
You just
I can
like
buy into
you just
that.
like wave your hand. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, medical stuff, medical
Yeah,
stuff.
I have no idea if this is possible or not, so I'll go along with it. The thing about the underground doppelgangers was a little bit more hard to swallow.
But I think that what he does well is before you get to the point where, like I said, this sort of wackadoodle premise is revealed, you're very, very invested in the emotional journey of the main character, Chris, played by Daniel Kaluuya, who looks so young in this movie.
Yeah, and I'm always because he has such a strong British accent
Yeah,
normally that I'm taken aback when he doesn't have it in one of his
yeah.
performances.
Yeah. So the film, I have to say at this point, if people don't at least have some idea of what this movie is about, I'd be shocked just because this is a film that has been so memed, because the idea of the sunken place has sort of gotten out into the culture. But the plot of this film is that Chris, played by Daniel Kaluuya, is a black man dating a white woman, Rose, played by Allison Williams, who is pitch perfect in this movie, by the way. She's really, really good. And I mean, everybody is, but he's going to her parents' house to meet them for the first time. And they sort of play off as sort of like rich liberals who think that they're enlightened, but in a way that's very awkward.
Very awkward, and it's like they're trying too hard,
Right, right,
by
right,
announcing it to the world.
right.
Well, the horror element is in the first scene.
Yes. The
When
first scene
Lakeith
is a shocker.
now Lakeith Stanfield, who is a huge star now,
hmm
the fact that he's in a small part like took me aback because I forgot that he was in it watching it this
Oh,
time. And
I
I
know you see
forgot
him walking up the street and you're
yeah.
like he's Stanfield, and then he gets kidnapped,
Yeah, and I
brutally
completely
kidnapped.
forgot about this scene, which ties in to what happens a little bit later because you find out what happens to him later in the movie. That scene apart, there's suspense building just from him having to go meet her parents for the first time, because he's very reluctant. He's like, have you prepared them? Do they know what I look like? That he's very concerned about that. And she's like, no, don't worry about it. Telling him, how woke they are or what have you. They're so woke that they'll annoy you. And they do before the horror comes in. There's suspense building just from that premise alone.
A sense of unease.
Yeah.
Right. Is like this sense of unease that's created. And because Chris is uneasy with just the idea of the trip in the first place. And then his friend Rod, played by Lil Howery, who is hilarious in this movie, is like, do not go to the white lady's parents' house, okay? Like, just don't do it. And he's like, come on,
Yeah. Well, he's the one saying nope in this movie, so he's kind of like the key to what the audience is thinking.
But I want to go back actually to the opening scene with Lakeith Stanfield really quick. So I don't know if you have watched the commentary on this film with Jordan Peele.
No.
You talk about Jordan Peele, his horror influences, they're very obvious, some of them, but also just when he's talking about his films, you can tell that he's really thinking about other horror films that he's seen and how his movie is sort of in conversation with those other films. And he talked about how the opening scene, he was thinking of two things. First was Halloween, the look of the street.
It completely looks like it's taken from Halloween, this scene.
And then the car approaching, he said he thought of the car almost like Jaws. He's like, it's coming up slowly and there's music playing and, the car is stalking. So he's created this whole mythology around this society that is in the film. And Jeremy is Rose's brother. You don't realize it's him at this point. He's wearing a Knights Templar helmet when he gets out of the car. Jordan Peele came up with this whole mythology about the society as the Knights Templar and how they had achieved actual immortality, which was the goal of the society, through this process that they have in the film. So everything that he put into this film meant something and maybe had like some layers behind it that even if the audience didn't see it or know about it, he was aware of it as a filmmaker. And I think one of the really amazing things about this film is that he's so assured as a first-time director. This doesn't feel like a first feature.
That whole scene in the beginning, not only is the car stalking him like the shark, but it's very evident the car is white as can be. You're just ripping off the Band-Aid by hitting somebody over the head, but you've got that whole other element of betrayal with Rose once you have the realization.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting when you watch it through the second time, because you have so many ways then to interpret her behavior. When the police come after Rose's hit this deer, the police officer asks for Chris's ID. And the police officer is asking for his ID because he's a black guy in a white neighborhood. And it's very obvious that that's what's happening. And you see Rose kind of call out the cop, like, you don't need his ID. And you think in that moment when you're first watching it that she's just defending Chris, that she's using her privilege as a white woman to defend him against, sort of this unfair profiling that the police officer is doing. But what's actually happening when you watch it the second time is you realize she doesn't want the police officer to know
who
anything about Chris because he's about to disappear.
But also, you could also take that in a couple of other different ways, because 9 times out of 10 in a movie like this, where an outsider is coming in, be it the Wicker Man or what have you,
right,
everybody's in on it. Right. So the police officer could be in on it. This could all be a dramatic show, between the two to reassure Chris that Rose is who she is, or Rose is so deluded herself that she is so upset and offended by this because she is just as deluded as her parents. Well, I am so woke, but I think it is more in line with your interpretation. But I was thinking this could be taken in so many different ways.
Yeah, it doesn't appear that the police are part of whatever's going on there. Like this is
I don't know.
clearly...
I think it would be brilliant if that guy was like all the way in the back when they're doing the bingo game.
Yeah, the auction.
You can't really notice somebody's all the way in the back over to the right. Yeah.
Yeah, it appears like it's really like a collusion of rich people. It is a secret society. So we're sort of creeping around this, but the big reveal of the film is that Rose's family and this secret society that they belong to have come up with this procedure, which is so bizarre.
Now, this is straight out of an American International movie from like the late 60s, early, like The Thing with Two Heads or something. It is. It's totally off the wall. And it seems in direct contrast with what you've seen up to this point.
Yeah. Over the course of the weekend, Chris is sort of put in the middle of this big rich white people party, right? That is happening the same weekend.
And Rose is like, oh, it's this weekend. Like, as if she had no idea, no memory that this is when this party was happening. Because he would have never have agreed to go if he knew about this.
Right, because it was awkward enough for him to meet her parents. And now he's in this at this party again, where you have all of these awkward interactions with rich white people who may or may not be well-intentioned from his perspective, right? From what he knows at this point.
Yeah, and the key word here is that you're missing is old.
Yes.
Rich, old white people.
They're all old. So, it starts off with these sort of like, there's all these like little, some of these aggressions are micro, some of them are macro. Okay, so you get like the first couple who is like, the guy's like, I was a professional golfer, but I knew Tiger, and there's just this obvious thing where he feels like he's trying to connect with Chris because Chris is black and Tiger Woods is black. And this is how I'm going to make this connection with this black guy who doesn't play golf.
But this is another thing that you pick up on in subsequent viewings. They're all assessing him.
Yes,
they're trying to get what they want out of him.
Yes.
So, I'm a golfer. Are you a golfer? Is this going to work out for me if I win the bingo? And like all these interactions are around this topic.
Yes,
without coming out and saying it.
More overt than others. The woman who's got like obviously a sickly husband who's like on oxygen, and she's like feeling Chris's arms and asking basically how the sex is, and it's so offensive on so many levels. And yes, first it just seems like this woman has no boundaries. But then when you watch it the second time, you're like, she's literally like feeling him to see if he will perform the way she wants to, if they win and her husband ends up in this body.
Right.
So we're still dancing around it. We should say before we go forward, there's a thing in this movie, it's called the coagula procedure. And the idea is that they will transfer the consciousness of one person into the body of another person. However, the original person is still there. They're sort of suppressed inside the body. And during the course of this party, Chris meets Lakeith Stanfield's character again. But this is not the same guy we saw at the beginning of the movie.
No, it's not. Although here's where it almost falls apart for me if I think about it too much.
Don't think about it. Yeah.
Because we get Lakeith Stanfield and now they're calling him Logan, right, at the party. When it's, you find out later this is Andre because he's a friend or a cousin of a friend or whatever.
Right.
Then you get Georgina, who's the housekeeper, and Walter, who's the groundskeeper. Yeah. Now, we've already gone past the point of no return in terms of spoilers. So it's later revealed because of this procedure where you're transferring somebody's essence, somebody's being into someone else's body, that Georgina, the housekeeper, is actually grandma.
Mm-hmm.
Armitage.
Yep.
Walter is actually Grandpa.
Yep.
And Andre is Logan, who won the bingo game previous. Now he's
In a new body.
in a new body.
Mm-hmm.
But they all act as if they're robots. Like Georgina doesn't act like grandma. She acts like a robot. Walter doesn't act like grandpa. He acts like a weird robot. And so does Logan. So I would have liked it. I know that this would give away if they were saying, if they were more part of the family. Maybe and it's all for show, like they're setting up Georgina as their housekeeper because Chris is there. They're
That's what
setting
it
up
is.
Walter because the groundskeeper because Chris is there.
So it's not explicit in the film, but in the commentary, Jordan Peele does say that's what happens because they don't want Grandma and Grandpa to give away the game.
Right. But
So,
still, it didn't seem like that they were, their personalities
mhm.
weren't there. They were vacuous, and it makes it more scary that way. But if you think about it, maybe it would have been more rewarding for subsequent viewings to have more of a tell from these characters, So because you think Logan is just brainwashed the way he comes across and he's snapping out of it. And he is to an extent, but it doesn't seem like there's a guy in there. It's just like it's like Andre brainwashed. You know what I mean? So I would have liked some more of that the old person's personality coming through.
So I think that obviously that is implied, especially because there's already been a discussion of brainwashing in the film through Rod, through Ray Howery's character, where Chris talks about how Rose's mom, Missy, has hypnotized him, and now he doesn't want to smoke anymore. And he's like, what are you, crazy? Like they could brainwash you, they could turn you into a sex slave, they could do all this stuff, right? And so the idea of the brainwashing, I think, has already been planted in you because of that conversation. And it's emphasized when Chris tries to take a picture of Andre and to send to Rod because he's like, I know this guy, and he can't figure out where he knows him from. And when he takes the photo, the flash goes off in Andre's face, and you see the flash in his eyes. It's actually a nice effect. And then his whole personality changes. He has a nosebleed, and he starts to scream, "Get out, get out." He's shaking Chris, "Get out of here, get out of the house." And you think, well, maybe he was brainwashed. You're not thinking that someone else's personality has been implanted in him. Okay.
So does that mean when Missy has to go talk to him in private?
Yeah.
He's brainwashing Logan as well as Andre?
No, I think she's just putting Andre back in the sunken place.
See, I still think that Logan should be more like Logan, or maybe like if he was more nervous, like when Chris starts questioning him, rather than just an automaton, it might even make things stranger or more uncomfortable than they already are. That's all I'm saying. So I'll drop it now. But that was the one thing. That was my underground doppelganger moment in Get Out.
Or maybe, old rich white people are really that boring.
Or clueless.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the implication here. So the commentary is very interesting. I mean, he thinks so deeply about every single thing in the movie. And he talked about how the initial hypnotism scene between Missy and Chris, and how he wanted it to feel like the Silence of the Lambs. This idea of like a person who is very still waiting for you to arrive. And then you have this interaction where Missy sort of starts digging around in Chris's psyche, looking for sort of the most traumatic moment of his life so that she can manipulate him. And the technique that she's using is like this tapping of this spoon on the teacup. And when he hears this later, it will basically put him into a paralysis, a physical paralysis. The other thing that Jordan Peele talked about is kind of how this whole society, this idea came to be. And the clue is actually in the story that Bradley Whitford's character tells about his dad, who was a runner, who he said was beaten by Jesse Owens.
And he says he still hasn't gotten over it.
And
now that is also a question. How old was this guy when he had Bradley Whitford? Because that took place quite some time ago.
yes. Yes, because it's, if people aren't aware, it is mentioned in the film, this was during the rise of the Third Reich and, Hitler was in power. So yes, this is a long time ago.
Yeah.
And the Jesse Owens story about Roman Armitage, his dad, Jordan Peele says, is the origin story of everything, that Armitage became obsessed after he was beaten by a black man on the world stage, and he had this idea that black people had certain natural physical advantages, and that combined with a quote unquote white man's determination could create the perfect being. Which is how and then Bradley Whitford's character is actually a neurosurgeon, apparently, who has figured out this procedure, which will
was
fulfill.
it passed down to Bradley Whitford? Was he the recipient of this secret procedure, or did he initiate it?
The understanding that I have from what Jordan Peele was saying in the commentary is that he's the one who created the procedure. He's the one who came up with it. Yeah.
Okay.
Because he had the scientific knowledge to sort of fulfill his dad's wish. And you do see a scene in which Walter, who is Roman, actually, in Walter's body, is running in the yard, right? He runs right at Chris in a very intimidating way and then kind of veers off to the right and then apologizes later for scaring him because he was doing his exercises.
Mm-hmm. He was beating Jesse Owens in his mind.
Yes. Yes. And the thing about this movie is that Chris is not a dumb character, right? You see that he's uneasy for different reasons throughout this. And then you see him at a certain point just being like, okay, we have to leave. Like something's really not right here and we have to go.
Yeah. And he's on his guard. So throughout the whole thing. So it's not like you need to yell at the character to get out because he's already 2 steps ahead of you.
Right.
In his apprehension.
Rose, Allison Williams' character, takes him away to have a conversation where he's sort of expressing everything that he feels uneasy about. And while he's gone, there is this silent auction. And
why does it need to be silent? He's gone, So
yeah. I don't know.
They can talk. He's out of earshot.
The silent auction, which is an auction for his body. And I'm sure, that Jordan Peele was aware of the optics, as he is of everything, of a bunch of white people bidding on a black man in the US. There's so much undertone to this.
Stephen Root plays Jim Hudson. This guy, Jim Hudson, Chris knows who he is because he's
an art dealer.
And Chris is a photographer. Hudson knows who Chris is, and he's a blind art dealer.
Mm-hmm.
Once you see this auction and you see that Hudson, who you interpreted as a friend to Chris or an ally to Chris as an audience member previous, he's in on this too, doing the bidding, and he says, I think he says to Chris, "I wish I had your eye."
Yeah.
And literally, that's what he wishes.
His eye. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
he wants his eyes. Yeah, and that's one of the few scenes where you see Chris kind of sit down and let his guard down. He's relaxed with this guy because he's blind, I think, because he feels he's not judging him in the same way that the other people at the party are, and because Hudson is familiar with his work. So you see him relax a little bit. And the only other time you really see him relax is with Rose. And that's why the betrayal comes so hard, right? Because like you said, She's made him fall in love with her. He loves her. He says that he loves her. And again, where Allison Williams plays this so perfectly, all throughout the film, you see different points where she's kind of giving other characters a certain look. And it seems like she's giving them a look because she's interpreting their racism and she's trying to tell them to back off. But on second viewing, you're like, oh no, she's telling them to like back off and not give the game away,
I
right?
know, especially all the guests at the party.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's like, calm down.
Yeah. Like her eyes get wide and she's kind of
Yeah.
like, and I think too, especially the scene with Jeremy at the dinner table when they first arrive.
This
There's
guy is such a scumbag. I just have to really give superlatives to this
Mhm,
actor because
mhm.
it looks like they just went to a trailer park and pulled this guy and said, "You're going to be in a movie. Just act like yourself." You hate this character of Jeremy
Yeah.
from the moment you see him.
And yet, in some ways, his character's more honest than the others, right? I mean, kind
Out
of
of out of entitlement, though.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree, but just out of just a bravado that
yeah.
is detestable.
Yeah, but I think like there is something about him where you can almost feel, that he's gonna ruin everything before they get to
Oh
the
yeah.
auction, you know?
At the dinner table, he almost
Yeah,
ruins everything.
yeah. Right at the moment when Chris is like, okay, we gotta go, we gotta go, we've got to get out of here. Something's not right. I don't know what it is, but something's not right. And Rose is like, okay, we'll go. I can't find my keys. I can't find my keys. And he finds in her bedroom, just before they're about to leave, this box of photographs of Rose with a variety of black men and one black woman, Georgina.
Yep, who, very importantly, he recognizes, in the
Hmm.
photo. So it's not just random people that he's seeing.
Right.
He's like, there's grandpa, there's
Hmm.
grandma.
Right. And she has indicated somehow or implied that he's the first black guy she's
Yes,
dated.
she says that, I think, at one point.
Yeah.
So
So,
so of course he's not thinking these are all the people that she's kidnapped and
right.
switched their brains.
Right.
The first thought is she's lied to me,
Right.
and this is the housekeeper downstairs. What is the deal with that?
Right. But now, of course, he's feeling a lot of urgency. Like, okay, gotta get out, gotta get out, gotta get
As
out.
anybody would, yes.
Yes. And they're coming down the stairs, and he's like, Rose, get the keys. And she's like, I can't find the keys. And then Jeremy's standing by the door with a lacrosse stick and standing in front of the door, not letting him go out.
And I
And
think at
then,
one point he says, "Forget the keys." I'm like, I'm just gonna
yeah,
start walking. Yeah.
yeah. And then Missy and Dean come in, and, they're suddenly looking very sober and not very welcoming. You know, and then suddenly Rose pulls the keys out of her bag and says, I can't give you the keys, babe. And you just see that switch flip
Yep. And
in
then that's
her.
when they bring him out to the Wicker Man in the backyard.
They basically do,
Yeah.
right? They put him in the basement. Missy uses her little teacup technique to paralyze him. They put him in the basement, and he's shown a little video all about the wonders of this procedure in which his whole personality is going to be suppressed. And
The
like,
fact that this video was made for the
mhm.
benefit of their victims just
Yeah.
shows how deluded these people are. With
Uh,
background music, if I'm not mistaken. There was music in
yes,
there, right?
yes.
Somebody composed music.
Now he's basically been told your body is no longer your own. Your consciousness is going to be suppressed. Someone else is going to take over your body, and you're just not going to exist anymore. And, it's such a horrifying idea. But again, it's also a wackadoodle idea. And you kind of have to be on board with Chris's emotional journey at this point for this to feel plausible.
Yeah,
You know,
because the next scene is Bradley Whitford in the surgical room
yeah.
with the guy's shaven head. So you're like, if you're not all in by that point, then you're
Yeah.
lost.
So you really just have to not think too hard about the plausibility of this. But I think you're so engaged in like I said, his emotional journey, and then the struggle to get free. Um, by this point, that you hopefully are not thinking too hard about sort of the
About how this
central,
works.
yeah,
Yeah.
about the central idea.
And they've already set up that Chris is, well, maybe he's not actively trying to quit, but Missy, as a side effect of her hypnotism, has taken the will for him to smoke out of
Hmm.
him. So he's very fidgety
Hmm.
throughout the movie. Obviously he would be anyway, being in the situation that he's in, but you see him like his fingers nervously gripping the arms of the chair. It ties in directly to how he escapes, a few minutes later.
Quite cleverly, the denouement just kind of gets crazy because he's got to, fight each individual member of the family basically to get out of the house. Of course, it comes down to Rose, who is trying to shoot him, and because she can't let him get away. Right. Now the house is on fire at this point.
They only show it in passing. Like they don't show
Hmm.
the whole house engulfed in flames. They only show the fire starting in that laboratory. So
Right.
you assume that the
Right.
house is going to burn.
Right. And all the evidence of their crimes will be
Hmm.
gone.
Or at least that lab is going to burn, at the very
Yeah.
least.
I mean, it's irrelevant anyway with that Dean, right? Because he's the only one who seems to be able to do the procedure. And
Yeah, yeah, Jeremy's not going to, especially after getting hit with the bocce ball or whatever that was.
he accidentally hits Georgina with the car, and he cannot leave her because this ties back to his own kind of traumatic event in his childhood where his mother was killed in a hit and run, and he was at home waiting for her to come home. And when she didn't come home, he was paralyzed. He was scared to do anything. He was only a child. So I think his expectations of himself were a little inflated, but he feels he can't leave her. So he puts her in the car. Rose shoots the car so he can't drive. He gets out of the car. She sicks Walter on him, and he kind of gets the real personality of Walter to come out again, the same way that he did for Andre with the Flash.
Of the Flash, yeah, because he realizes.
He turns on Rose. Walter turns on Rose and he shoots her, but then
Because Walter, is a victim of Rose. Well, not Walter, but
Mhm.
Walter, whoever was in, I don't know what
Right,
his
whatever
name
his real
was,
name is, yeah.
whoever is inhabiting is stuck in the sunken place inside
Mhm.
of Walter. He was betrayed by Rose too. So he gets his little revenge on her before turning the gun on himself.
But, she's been hit with the shotgun in the stomach, but she's still alive. She starts to try to go for the shotgun again. Chris comes over and starts to strangle her. She has such a look on her face in this moment when he's doing this, almost smug, like he's fulfilling some kind of expectation she had of him. It's very disturbing. But then he backs off. He's like, I'm not gonna do this. But then the cops show up, you think?
Now we haven't talked about Rod in a while, so
Yeah.
this is all being intercut. This whole climax
Hmm.
of Rod's outside looking in, getting closer and closer to the truth
Hmm.
until, he goes to the police, and in a very funny scene, they like listen to everything he has to say and they all start laughing.
Yes. Now, Rod is a TSA agent, should be noted.
Yeah, so he
Uh,
has access to files himself.
mhm.
And he goes off on a rant about Jeffrey Dahmer's head at one point that is so funny.
Improvised, by the
Oh, not
way.
Jeffrey Dahmer's head. I'm sorry, one of his
Yes.
victims' heads. Yeah.
Right, right. Improvised line, by the
Yeah.
way. Jordan Peele said he let Ray Howery kind of do his thing, like in some of these scenes, just so that and he's like, we got so many funny lines out of him. But he shows up, you see the flashing lights of the police car, and you think you know how this is gonna end. A black man standing over a white woman, he's covered in blood, he puts his hands up in the air. And Rod gets out of the TSA vehicle. come to save the day.
Now,
So,
what I did watch was the alternate ending.
yeah, so there's an alternate ending in which he does kill Rose and then goes to jail.
Because it is the police that show up and not
Right.
Rod. Jordan Peele felt that a hero should come out of this movie. I couldn't help but thinking, even before I knew about that alternate ending, is that how are they going to explain all this?
Well, I
Or,
mean,
or are they not, because nobody knows that Chris was there to begin with?
right, right. Nobody knows Chris was there. So I think that probably the police wouldn't look too far. They would say, here's a scenario, right? Like there's a dead woman in the car, the house is burning, there's a woman in the middle of the street who's been shot. There's a black man who appears to have shot himself. Something happened here, and they would just, I think, write off the whole crime scene.
But the way that the movie ends, it is on an upbeat note. So it kind of brings Rod's story to fruition,
Yeah.
that, he was right. I told you so. He could have that "I told you so"
Right.
moment, which wouldn't play quite the same as if he's telling him in jail,
Right, right. I told you shouldn't have gone to that white lady's house.
Yeah.
It's a good ending in the sense that, Rod has come to the rescue. All the bad people have been eliminated, although, presumably this society is still out there.
Yeah, but like you said, nobody else can do the procedure.
Yeah. So when Jordan Peele came up with this concept, Obama was elected president, and he said he wanted to write something that exposed what he called the post-racial lie. He said, when we elected a black man president, everybody was like, racism is over. Obviously, that was not his experience, and nor was it the experience of a lot of people. And he felt that he wanted to write something that sort of exposed it, and that he was very deliberate when he was writing this, that he didn't want this to seem to take place in like a red state or anything. He wanted it to be this sort of stereotype of the upper class white liberal who thinks that they're very enlightened. That was really important to him, to the way the story played out.
All these themes run rampant throughout this movie, but
Yeah.
again, if you just take it as a straight horror movie,
It's
I
just
think
a
it
scary
works
horror movie.
exceedingly. Yeah, and it's extremely entertaining as well. It's an audience pleasing movie, and it was a huge hit upon its release. Put Jordan Peele on the map, thankfully.
Yeah, and like I said, I think one of the things that's great about this movie is he's so assured. He knows exactly what he wants from the script, from the performances, the way he directs the film, the way the film looks visually. And he's used Michael Abels as his composer for all three of his films. And I'm such a huge fan of his work. I think he just does beautiful, kind of really minimalist scores that are very, very effective.
4.5 million was the budget on this, and 255 million was the box office. So a huge hit, released in February of 2017. Even with stiff competition being released at that time, usually horror movies, second, third weekend drop off precipitously, percentage wise. And this didn't. This had legs. So yeah, it went on to make over 250 million at the box office. It was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor. Didn't win any of those. That was also the year that Shape of Water won for Guillermo. So that was a solid horror year at the Academy Awards, which is not normal. But he did win for Best Original Screenplay, at least. So he does have an Oscar on his shelf for this movie.
Yeah, and it does seem, we've talked about this before, how kind of reluctant the Academy is to acknowledge horror, and the fact that he won the screenplay is kind of a big deal. It's so disappointing. Like a film like this, I think, is worthy of winning Best Picture,
well, I am happy that it was nominated, and I love Shape of Water as well. And of course you love Guillermo as well, so it's
another
not like
guy
that,
who came out of horror and honestly Shape of Water has a lot of horror elements in it, but it's not a horror
Not a horror
movie.
movie per se. It
Yeah.
is a monster movie. I'll give it
Yeah.
that.
But it does get frustrating because you do have a situation where um award ceremonies just don't like to acknowledge horror. And I think it's because, there's this idea that horror is cheap because a lot of it is cheaply made, but there's so much transcendent, thoughtful horror out there, and Get Out is a great example of that. And Get Out's financial success really paved the way for a lot more kinds of movies, including our second feature that we're going to talk about, Polite Society, because Nita Manzoor talked about seeing Get Out and thinking, thinking of kind of the possibilities that it created.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll make a surgical procedure movie. That's
But also the idea of we'll get into it, but as she says, making the kind of movie that she wanted to see when she was younger, but not seeing herself in it.
So, having said all that
Hmm.
about Get Out, what kind of buckets would we give it out of 5?
So I am going to give it 4 buckets, because I love Us, as you know, and I really love Nope as well. So I'm going to give it 4.
I will match you on that. This is probably my favorite of the Jordan Peele trilogy, if I'm allowed to say that, because he's come out with 3 movies so far that he's directed. It's probably my favorite of the 3, although Nope is very, very close. Us, not so much because of the plausibility factor, even though I don't think it's a bad movie. I still liked it. But I really like Get Out, and I will also match you 4 buckets.
Mhm.
And again, putting aside all that thematic stuff that's in it, which is very rewarding in itself, but I think it just succeeds. It's superlative, just as a straight horror movie. If you want to watch it as that, you won't be disappointed. So let's go to the concession stand. And what have you brought to the table, Christina?
Well, I think that we need a cool, refreshing drink.
Oh,
Today.
Okay.
As you know, when you go to the movie theater, they want to sell you a nice fizzy drink. And so I'm going to talk about the history of Coca-Cola.
Oh.
Yeah, I am not going to give you the entirety of
I was going to say that this is
Coca-Cola,
probably a 2-hour episode in itself.
But Coca-Cola is a carbonated soft drink, as you know. By the way, when I was a kid, I was so disappointed that a soft drink wasn't actually soft. I thought it would be like a shake. I was like, oh, it's a soft drink. Like, why isn't it soft? Like, why is it? And it felt, if you, just to use the adjective in this way, it felt hard to me because the bubbles.
Well, you're talking about the physical feeling of
the physical
swallowing
feeling
this.
of the drink. Yeah. So
What should they call it? A hard drink? Well,
Yeah.
that would give the impression that there's alcohol in it.
Right.
A difficult drink? A
Right,
painful
right.
drink?
So, it's fizzy because it's got carbon dioxide in it, which provides the bubbles. So, here's a very quick history of Coca-Cola. It was originally marketed as a temperance drink, which in fact is why it's a soft drink and not a hard drink, right? Something to drink besides alcohol. And it was intended as a patent medicine, so it was like sold in bottles in pharmacies. It was invented in the late 19th century by John Stith Pemberton in Atlanta, Georgia. In 1888, Pemberton sold the ownership to Asa Griggs Candler, a businessman whose marketing tactics led Coca-Cola to its dominance of the soft drink market. The drink's name refers to 2 of its original ingredients. I'm sure people are aware of this. Coca leaves, which are also the basis of cocaine, and cola nuts, which is a source of caffeine. However, the rest of the formula of Coca-Cola is a trade secret, of course. and I think of it almost like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, right? Like people trying to sneak in and find out and try to duplicate exactly what makes Coca-Cola have that particular flavor.
Which is very confusing to me when I hear that this is a trade secret, because, to the undiscerning consumer whose taste buds perhaps are not as attuned, there are many generic brands of, various grocery chains have their own colas. There's RC Cola, there's Pepsi Cola. Most people will say they all taste the same, but that is not the case. They are all different, and Coca-Cola, as you said, has a highly guarded secret recipe, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, of course. Being sort of the first out of the gate, all of the imitators use part of their name. They're called colas. The concentrate is produced by the Coca-Cola Company, which is then sold to the licensed Coca-Cola bottlers throughout the world, who then produce the finished product in combination with filtered water and sweeteners. So apparently the Coca-Cola Company makes the secret formula and then they send it out to the bottling companies all around the world. And of course, they have come up with various versions of Coke throughout the years. And speaking specifically of movie theaters, I think at Regal they're only doing Pepsi now, but a lot of theaters do have Coke products, and they have what's called the freestyle machine, which I'm not sure if you've ever seen this, Shem, which is where you can it makes various types of Coke for you.
This is the do-it-yourself machine where you can press the digital button. Yeah, there's a few theaters up here that have that. But yeah, to your point, Regal has some kind of deal with Pepsi where it's Pepsi drinks that you can get at Regal. AMC has Coke, but generally when I go to a smaller mom and pop kind of a theater, it's always Coke rather than Pepsi.
Yeah. And I do think, just anecdotally, I think most people prefer Coke. And again, it's something to do with their particular formula. Pepsi is a little bit sweeter, I think. And Coke has, I almost want to call it a burn. There's like some kind of back of your throat quality in a Coke.
There is. I never really was a soda drinker as a kid because of that burn. I just thought, why would I drink something that hurts me? Even though I did like the taste of it. So I would always let the soda sit after I opened it, and then I would drink it when it was flat.
Oh, that doesn't sound good to me.
That's the only way it was palatable to me. I can't drink soda anymore because it turns out that I'm allergic to high fructose corn syrup, which is how they sweeten these things.
Yeah, that is the base of a bottle of Coke. Like a non-diet version of Coke is mostly high fructose corn syrup. It contains in 12 ounces 38 grams of sugar, which is mostly high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't want to go too much into the history of this, but I do want to just talk quickly about the origins of this as a medicine. It really fascinate me. So Colonel John Pemberton, he was wounded in the Civil War. He was addicted to morphine. He had a medical degree and was trying to find a substitute for morphine. He registered what he called French wine Coca as a nerve tonic. So it had Coca, as I mentioned, which is the coca leaf, and the African cola nut, which was the source of caffeine. So basically, this is like a super concentrated drink. When Atlanta and Fulton County passed prohibition legislation in 1886, he developed the non-alcoholic version of French wine Coca, which was marketed as Coca-Cola, the temperance drink. And it sold for 5 cents a glass at a pharmacy. And drugstore soda fountains were popular in the United States at the time because people believed that carbonated water was good for health.
So was this sold as like an elixir?
Initially, it was sold as like an elixir in like a little bottle, but then once it started to get sold at soda fountains, like I said, there was this idea that it was like a health drink, which is really, really crazy to me, considering the way people talk about soda now, like it's,
Right.
the
Like
drink of the
so if
devil.
somebody comes in with a cough to your pharmacy, like,
Yes.
I got a cough. What can I have? Here's some Coke.
The drink was marketed and sold as a patent medicine. Pemberton claimed it was a cure for many diseases, including, most importantly for him, morphine addiction, indigestion, nerve disorders, headaches, and impotence. So,
Were there studies behind these claims?
no, there are no peer-reviewed studies indicating whether or not the claims of Coca-Cola as a health drink were founded. Yeah, so obviously it went through a number of iterations to become sort of a popular drink when the ownership of the company transitioned away from Pemberton. There's actually quite a drama involved because his son, Charlie Pemberton, also ended up becoming an alcoholic and an opium addict and was sort of interfering in the transition to the new owner. It is a whole drama. And of course, nowadays, carbonated drinks and sodas are, considered like a tool of the devil that are, making the whole country unhealthy. So I think it's very funny that this drink was initially marketed as a health drink. The listed ingredients of a basic can of Coke are carbonated water, sugar, which is either sucrose or high fructose corn syrup, depending on the country, caffeine, phosphoric acid, caramel color, and quote unquote natural flavorings, which I assume is the secret ingredient.
Right. And of course, there's many imitators out there that have jumped on the Coke bandwagon. The biggest competitor, as we mentioned, is Pepsi. So during the 80s, I remember fondly the soda wars of Coke versus Pepsi, all those commercials, which would have the secret taste test. So you would be given 2 glasses. One would have Coke and one would have Pepsi. You wouldn't know which was which. I forget whose campaign was that. I think it was
Pepsi's.
It was Pepsi's, right?
And that's because Pepsi is sweeter in taste. And a lot of times in like a little shot glass, which is what they give you, like a little taste, Pepsi tastes better in the moment in a quick drink. And so it was called the Pepsi Challenge.
Yes.
Pepsi was kind of winning these Pepsi challenges because if you take a quick shot of something and you just taste the sweetness, right? Seems like more people do prefer to just drink Coke because over the long term, that sweetness is like too much, right? Some people love a super sweet drink. I'm not saying that. If you like Pepsi, more power to you. But for myself, if I drink a soda, I actually usually drink Diet Coke. I know it's very bad for me. I like Coke because it is even the diet version of Pepsi is still sweeter than the diet version of Coke. But Coke I've mentioned the freestyle machine. There's like all of these different flavors that you can make. Obviously, like Coke Vanilla, and then there's all of these international versions. There's a golden Coca-Cola that's made in Beijing. There's Coca-Cola Raspberry, Coca-Cola Citrus, which is only available in New Zealand and Japan. There's Coca-Cola Ginger, which mixes it with the taste of ginger beer. It's only available in Vietnam, Australia, and New Zealand.
Well, actually, it's probably available in Epcot Center as well because they always have that Club Cool, I think they used to call it. I don't know what it's called now, but it's still there, where you can sample Coca-Cola from across the world in little cups. So it's, you do have to pay the admission fee to get into Disney World, but that's a perk for you.
There is a marshmallow edition that has a strawberry and watermelon flavor. There is what they call Coca-Cola Ultimate. And the flavor is quote unquote Experience Point, which is tropical and floral flavored. So basically the Coke base seems like it can be used endlessly, to add stuff in. And of course, I remember when I was young, my dad used to always talk about how much he loved to get a cherry Coke float from the soda fountain when he was a teenager in the 60s, when they would put, a spray of like cherry syrup in the Coke.
Right, right.
Uh,
I imagine, or maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, that it tasted this similar, at least, to the cherry Coke that they came out with in the mid '80s, and I was all about that. I
mm,
loved the cherry Coke. Now, that talking about the mid '80s, that was also the time where they ditched the classic Coke formula and came
yeah.
out with new Coke, which was highly controversial at the time.
Yes. Yes. And still controversial. Like people are still mad about
They're still
it.
talking about it, even though I don't think it's available anymore.
It's
The new
not.
Coke.
It was available from 1985 to 2002. It was an unpopular formula change, and it was actually later rebranded as Coca-Cola 2 until its full discontinuation in 2002.
Because, to my taste, it just seemed like it was a sweeter version of the regular Coke. Maybe to somehow compete with the Pepsi challenge that we just talked about.
Yeah.
But people just rejected it wholesale. I don't remember being that jazzed about it either once it came out.
I think it's interesting. People really like your soda is almost like your cocktail, right? Like people have like one drink that they really like. Like people really who like Dr. Pepper, they don't like Mr. Pibb or whatever, or some
Right.
people only drink Fanta. People really like the formula for whatever their fizzy drink is, and there was no way that people who liked Coke were going to embrace a new version of Coke. They
Especially if they couldn't get the old version anymore.
yeah. So, I think as an idea, they could have potentially presented it as an option to people who didn't like the original formula.
Right,
But they
right.
didn't do that. What they tried to do was just get rid of the old thing entirely, which didn't really work out.
Or if you're a cynic, you could think that it was all a ploy to raise the sales of the classic Coke once they inevitably brought it back, which they did. And it was called Coca-Cola Classic for some time.
Right. Yeah. I do think that, people just, like I said, really just like the formula for whatever their drink is. That, that's what they like. I don't drink other sodas. I just drink Diet Coke.
Do you remember the taste of New Coke? Did you try it when it came out?
I don't remember trying New Coke. If I did, I don't remember, I remember seeing the cans.
Because it just said Coke. It was no
Yeah.
longer Coca-Cola. It was just Coke.
So it's got some different names and competitors around the world. There's a competitor in Turkey called Cola Turka, in Iran and Middle East, Zam and Parsi Cola, in some parts of China, Future Cola, and the Czech Republic and Slovakia, Kofola. So there are other companies out there trying to still compete with the kind of worldwide dominance of Coke. PepsiCo is still second to Coke in sales worldwide. RC Cola, which you mentioned, is owned by Dr. Pepper, the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, and that is the third largest soft drink manufacturer. And some people do really love RC,
Yeah.
although you don't usually see it at the movie theater.
They still make Tab, don't they?
I don't know if they still make Tab, but my grandmother drank Tab. That's the only drink she ever drank. She always had cans of Tab in her refrigerator. But I remember that was sort of something that was sold during like the as a diet. It was sold as a diet drink, obviously at
And
a
then
time.
for a while they had Jolt Cola, which was taken off the market, which was jacked up in caffeine.
I think that Coke has done a really good job of associating themselves with a kind of nostalgia similar to the way people, especially from the 80s, feel about like McDonald's, right? So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you think about like the Coke commercials and like the jingles, right? The Coke jingles. Like I think that any kid from the 80s could sing "I'd like to give the world a Coke," right?
Yeah.
Just like you can sing the Big Mac jingle, even if
hmm
you haven't had
Or
Big
no,
Mac in
actually,
years.
from the '80s, "Coke is it," I think
Yeah, oh yeah, Coke
was the
is
big
it.
jingle. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, my son, whenever we go to the movies, and that's often because of this show. But
Hmm.
whenever we go to the movies, he's always like, "Are we going to Regal?" Because he doesn't like Pepsi. That's
Yeah. See, he's already in it. He has his
yeah,
drink.
yeah,
His drink is Coke. That's
yep,
it. He doesn't
yep,
want anything else.
yeah.
And I do think that gets established at some point, and people just like the taste of a certain drink. So, can I buy you a Coke before our second feature?
Yes, please, please
All
do.
right. Mine's going to be diet.
Diet's not good.
I try not to drink it too often. It's like a treat for me. But I love the taste of a Diet Coke. And again, that sort of Coke burn is great in a Diet Coke.
Yes, I will accept your offer for this show, but just be prepared that my stomach will make loud sounds of protest because of the high fructose corn syrup in this. Okay, so let's leave the concession stand with
Hmm.
Cokes in hand,
Hmm.
and we are going to sit down for Polite Society.
Yes.
Now, this is a new movie, meaning that it came out this year in 2023,
Hmm.
and directed by Nita Manzoor.
Hmm.
And this is her directorial debut, just as Get Out was Jordan Peele's.
Yes. Although Nita Manzoor also worked on a show about a British Pakistani girl punk band called We Are Lady Parts, which was very successful. And she said that, her work on the show really helped her, establish herself as a filmmaker and really kind of figure out what she wanted to do as a filmmaker because she didn't go to film school. But the work on that show really helped her kind of find her voice. Again, like Get Out, this is a very assured first feature.
Simple story of two sisters. One older sister who is about to get married. The younger sister is not having any of it. She is distrustful of the fiance and does everything in her power to stop this wedding. Now, you're thinking this could be a romantic comedy, right? Or something
Hmm.
very lighthearted. It works martial arts into it as well as a surprise horror element. It's not as pervasive as Get Out is. Get
Hmm.
Out is like a horror movie from beginning to end.
Right.
This is not. This kind of hits you over the head with the horror at the end, or it's not. I wouldn't even call it horror. It's just got like an element, a fantastical horror element thrown in at the end of it, which is the fiance and his mother are the antagonists when it comes to the younger sister, but it turns out they truly are antagonists by the end of the movie. So she's kind of like the girl who cried wolf. And it turns out that everything that she saw, just like in that story, was in fact true. She wasn't just crying wolf.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting about this film, so it's the Khan family, right? And I love the way that the structure of this, it's broken down into 5 chapters. And the first chapter is called The Tale of Two Sisters, right? So Ria is still a high school girl. She goes to like a private school, and she wants to be a stunt woman when she grows up. She has a website called Confu, where she performs various stunts. And her sister, Lena, is an art school dropout, and she's clearly struggling. You see that at the beginning. But her relationship with Rhea is kind of a highlight. You see, like, she's laying in bed, she's depressed, and Rhea comes in and she's like, "Help me with the video." And she's like, "No." And Rhea's like, "Help me with the video." And she's like, "No." And then she starts dragging her off the bed. And she's like, "Please, please." And then you see her outside helping her with the video and getting into it. This
Yeah, yeah.
relationship is really the heart of this movie. You see their closeness. I think you see this as the way the relationship is written feels so real, the dynamic between an older sister and a younger sister.
Hmm.
Um, and it really grounds this movie because Rhea has this picture of the future where Lena's going to be an artist and she's going to be a stunt woman. And in a lot of ways, they're going to sort of defy, again, this is sort of subtextual, the expectations of immigrant family success, right?
Yes, yeah. Her parents, of course, want to see them both either in a professional kind of a job or at least married to a very successful husband. So
Right.
these
Although
these fanciful notions of being the artist and being the stunt woman are at various points in this movie dismissed by both parents.
Although their parents, I think it's very interesting because they're kind of laid back, their parents, which I actually like because they don't seem like they're sort of actively pressuring them, you
No,
know?
but you can tell that they're just kind of humoring them, for
Yeah,
some of the dialogue suggests that. Like, we were hoping that you would get this out of your system by now, and that's why
right.
we sent you, we were okay with art school, and which, Lena has dropped. And as she's dropped out of art school and she's really questioning her own talent. So when Rhea drags her out of bed, it's like bringing her back to the world, getting her involved in something. Rhea gets out of it that Lena is actually, once she gets into filming these videos, Lena is actually supportive of her
Yeah,
sister, one of the only ones that's supportive of her sister. So
yes.
that's why it's so heartbreaking to Rhea when Lena starts getting lost in this guy, Salim. The videos stop and she's got nobody else but her two friends to converse with. She's losing her sister.
Yes, and I really do also like this dynamic between Rhea and Alba and Clara. We're two best friends, who are super supportive also of Rhea. And
And
there's
they kind of like fill that Rod role from
yes.
Get Out.
Hmm.
And also they're the comic relief of the movie.
Yes. And it happens a little bit later, but the scene where they go into the gym locker is truly like the highlight of the movie for me. The three of them are just ridiculous. Anyway, Rhea is really feels like she's sort of fighting stereotypes every second of the day, right? She has to do some kind of internship as a school assignment, and she says she wants to intern with this stunt woman. And the teacher is like, why don't you intern, in a doctor's office? And she says, do I look like a doctor to you? And Kovacs, who is her personal bully, says, yeah, mate, you do. Right. So there's like this idea that like, if you're South Asian, then you should become a doctor, right? And she doesn't want to be that. She wants to be a stunt woman. That's what she wants from her life.
And so this woman that she looks up to, like the most successful stunt woman in Britain, I think
Hmm.
she's described as
Yeah,
Eunice Huthart. I'm assuming this is a real person.
it is. She's a real person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's her
So
real voice at the end of the movie, by the way, reading
it
the,
is okay.
yeah. Hmm.
So throughout the movie,
Hmm.
Rhea is texting or emailing this stunt woman and not getting anything in return.
Hmm.
So she's kind of like Rhea's obsession
Yeah.
throughout the movie, and she's getting nothing back. So that kind of feeds into her desperation about losing her sister because she's also not hearing from her greatest hero. And you realize at the end that it was just because she was busy working on a movie or something. And then she, in
She's
fact,
working on a Marvel.
she was working on a Marvel and she was reading these emails and she
Yeah.
was looking at the videos. So it does validate Rhea at the end as well and what she wants to do.
Yeah. And it's interesting because she initially sends like a very a schoolgirl's idea of a professional letter, right? Kind of asking to work with her. But then as the movie goes on and she doesn't get a response, Eunice almost becomes like this repository for her feelings in a way, like all these things that she's feeling that she can't tell anybody else or she can't express. And she's telling this woman that she doesn't know very, very personal things about what's happening in her life.
Gave me a feeling like Snuffleupagus, it's like this
Yeah.
nobody, she is not even real. She's only real in Rhea's eyes.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that throughout the movie, she's working on this super kick, which she calls the Fury. She also calls herself the Fury. That's her
Yes.
alter ego.
Yes.
But this super spin kick that Eunice has perfected, that she's also trying to perfect, and she can't do it throughout the movie until the final. And it's such a cathartic scene for her and for the viewer.
Yeah. And it's so great because when she does whenever she's doing these videos or whenever she's fighting, like there's a scene where she fights Kovacs, right? There's always like this little hawk cry in the background before she tries to do the kick, like you can tell she's kind of got like not just this internal monologue, but like this internal soundtrack that goes with everything that she's doing. And one of the things that Nita Manzoor talked about was that first initial scene, the Kovacs versus Khan, the first big fight scene in the movie, is that some people were initially very surprised by sort of the brutality of the fight scenes. And she's like, well, I always wanted, she said that she grew up on Jackie Chan movies and she always wanted to have these kinds of like intense action scenes in films, but with people that looked like her. It's such a great scene. All the fight scenes are like really well done, like really well choreographed, and there's quite a few of them through the movie. So you sort of see this initial setup, chapter one, right? A Tale of Two Sisters, sort of establishing Lena and Rhea, and then it goes into chapter two, which is the Eid soiree, which is when you are introduced to Salim.
So when this happens, I'm like, what is going on here? Is this like a debutante ball? It really speaks a lot about the societal aspect of the parents of this younger generation. How this Salim's mother is putting on this party so she can gather prospects for him.
Yes.
It's almost like, The Bachelor. You're watching the filming of The Bachelor for ABC. That's basically what's happening in this party.
Yes.
And Rhea discovers that even though it's creepy to begin with, the whole setup of the party, she wanders at one point to an upstairs room during the party, because she's there too, as a guest, finds an office where on the desk there's photos of all the girls that have been invited, as if Salim's or the mom is going through and picking the best ones, based on physical characteristics alone. And that's not far from the truth.
Yeah. The mom is Rahila, and she just seems like a little too interested in her son.
In the early stages of the movie, you're so far gone by this time if you're still listening to this episode and you haven't seen Polite Society yet. But if you don't know what Polite Society is really about watching it, at this point, you could think it's, like I said, going to be a romantic comedy. Rhea is jumping to conclusions, and by the end of the movie, everybody's going to be all copacetic. She'll accept Salim for what he is. She'll love him just like she does her sister, like a normal Hallmark movie might end, right? That has this basic plot set up. But no, she is correct in every assumption that she makes. And it's giving you little clues as well that all is not what it seems. First, this scene in the office where she finds all the photos, right?
Right.
And then a little bit later, when she goes to spy on the house, she sees him laying down, his head in his mother's lap, watching TV as she's stroking his hair. This is a 30-year-old man.
Yeah. So it just like everything seems off, but also, throughout the second chapter, as like Lena starts to spend more time with Salim, and then you get to the third chapter, which is Operation Wife Hunter, which is like my favorite section, which is when, Rhea and Alba and Clara come up with this plan to try to like find dirt on Salim to, expose him to Lena. And Rhea gets more and more intense as she's trying to discredit Salim. And of course, their parents are thrilled because he's rich and he's eligible, right? And he's handsome. And of course, they want their dropout art school daughter to marry this guy. They don't understand Rhea's objections. And Lena is happy because he's paying attention to her and he seems to appreciate her for who she is. And there starts to become this tension, which is Rhea just jealous because she's losing the most important person in her life, or is there something really wrong? You know,
And it gets to a point where a clock is ticking
right.
because Rhea comes home one day and she's already against this relationship,
Yep.
but she finds one of Lena's paintings in the garbage
Yeah.
outside. She comes in and the first thing she hears is that Lena's now engaged and they're going where? To Singapore, I think it
To
was.
Singapore.
To Singapore.
Yeah.
So to get married. So now Rhea has a timeline that she has to meet in order to break this up before Lena can get taken away.
Right. So you have this elaborate scene where she and Clara and Alba go to the gym to try to get Salim's laptop, which involves Rhea and Alba having to put on male disguises.
Because they want to find dirt on him. They think that's the only way that they can break this up because,
Right.
Rhea's fears alone won't do it.
Right. And this sequence is truly one of the funniest sequences in the movie. But it also leads to one of the most brutal fights in the movie because Salim tells Lena that he ran into Rhea at the gym, and Lena's like, stay out of my life. And they have this absolutely brutal fist fight, which is it's funny and it's heartbreaking at the same time. And then, you can see that Rhea is really trying to get through to her. She's like, he thinks you're kind, like you're not kind, like you're arrogant, like you're.
And that's a tell too, because when they're sitting there in the gym, and Rhea asks him what you like about my sister, he says the most generic thing that you could think of.
And I also love that they're having this incredibly brutal fight, and their parents are just standing in the kitchen eating toast, looking at the ceiling and kind of listening to the noises.
This is normal. This is normal.
Yeah. And that's what I mean.
What, did that happen? Did that happen in your households growing?
Their parents are so casual, which I just really like that about these two characters. Their parents are very casual. And then their mom's like, I don't care who started it, just clean it up and get down here. But of course, at this point, they can't.
Is that the fight where Lena puts Rhea's head into the picture on the wall?
Yeah.
And her forehead is bleeding?
They break the door. I mean, like, it's a mess. Like, it's a really brutal fight. At this point, though, like, they can't find any dirt on him. And Clara and Alba are like, maybe he's actually a nice guy. And Rhea's like, no, he's not a nice guy. And she tells them off. And they're like, okay, like, we just went through all this to support you. And,
we're not going to help you. We're not going to help you anymore. Yeah.
So this is kind of when her insanity peaks, right? You, as the viewer, you think she's totally gone off the deep end. They can't find any dirt. She decides to fill condoms with lotion to plant them in his room too. I'm not sure what she was thinking.
She ties them like water balloons.
Who would do that? And she seems to have some idea that like Lena will see them and think he's a womanizer. And then while she's in his bedroom snooping around in the Shaw mansion, she's discovered, but she also finds a photo of his first wife.
And she thinks she's got it right there in her hand, the evidence. This is also the point where she sees him being cradled in his mother's lap like a baby.
Right.
Yeah.
So she finds this photo and she's like, I'm going to expose this. But of course, there's a tragic story. The wife died. Rhea comes across now as completely insane and very insensitive, right? So everything she's tried to do is backfired, and Lena is furious at her. Lena's like basically not talking to her, like, just stay out of my life. And this is, of course, the opposite of what she'd wanted. Everything she's done is to try to get her sister back and away from this guy. And so then, again, you sort of think at this point, maybe there's really nothing wrong with these people.
But she's still feeding you. She's still feeding you little bits to make you think that Rhea is right, because Lena herself, kind of like Chris at one point, is like groggy or drugged or something because she goes to sleep and
Mm-hmm.
thinks that she dreamt it, but as an audience member that she didn't,
Mm-hmm.
being in a lab and Salim like working on her somehow.
Right. So it comes after this point that you see that scene. So you see the scene where Rhea kind of seems to have gone off the deep end with her behavior, and then the Nita Mensur start to turn you around to be like, okay, Rhea's actually right, and all these weird things are happening.
Her mom makes her go and apologize
Right.
to Salim's mom. And now you realize that she's in danger by doing this because she's by herself
With
in this woman's
Rahila.
house. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And Rahila tries to first comes across as very friendly, like, come and have a spa day with me and all this stuff. And then it starts to turn. The spa day turns into,
A forced waxing.
yes, which is, played as a torture scene, which is incredibly clever, where she's trying to get information from her, and although the estheticians are holding Rhea down as they're waxing her legs. Nina Manzora said she did really want that scene in the movie, this idea of like beauty standards being torture. And during the course of trying to escape this forced waxing, she finds the lab.
Well, mom also gives it up. Like she monologues during
Mm,
this. Lena wasn't my first choice, she
yeah.
says at one point.
But you still don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
So Rhea finds this lab where they apparently collected genetic material. She recognizes the glasses that all the women used at the party. They're all like in this, they're all behind like little doors. And they
And there's like
apparently,
animal embryos.
yeah, like, right, in tubes, like it's aliens. They apparently collected genetic material from all of these women and then did some kind of test to determine fertility and uterus strength.
Yeah,
Again,
somehow from, lipstick mark or
right,
fingerprints or so yeah.
right,
So there's a leap here. There's a big leap here. And
right, right. And this is what I mean, where just like in Get Out, there's kind of a wackadoodle idea at the center of this movie, and you have to get on board with it. But just like with Get Out, you're so invested at this point in the emotional story of these two sisters that you can kind of go along with it. But it's still not completely clear what
what you know
the
something nefarious in this
right,
lab is
right,
happening. Rhea
right.
escapes by breaking a window in the lab and running back home. But now it's like now she sounds really crazy, with this story.
Right, right, right. And her parents are not inclined, her mother, kind of pulls her mom aside to tell her this. And her mother's just not inclined to believe her at this point
Which
because,
nobody would,
right, because she's acted so deranged up to this point, and everybody thinks she's just not accepting that her sister's getting married and moving to Singapore.
And she's just coming up with more fantastical stories by the day.
She apologizes to Clara and Alba, gets back in their good graces, and they agree again to another insane plan.
She tells them about the lab. So they're like,
Right.
well, we can't have this going on. So we'll help you again.
So then they come up with a plan to steal Lena from her own wedding. And I just want to say it almost works.
It does because they have a plan to chloroform her.
Hmm.
And they have a plan to, masquerade as the hired help so they can get Lena like under the classic, the maid's cart when they leave the hotel room. So, and that's their whole plan is to get Lena out in that fashion.
Yeah. And it works, right? They get that far.
Even though Lena's like, okay, what are you two doing here? Because obviously she knows her sister's friends.
Right.
But she's not quick enough to stop one of them from coming up behind and putting the chloroform over her mouth.
Hmm. And at this point, they have recruited Kovacs, Rhea's bully, to help them out because she has a car. They've gotten her on board with this by agreeing to do her history homework for the rest of the year.
Yep.
So, and they all have, little remote earpieces in their ear. Rhea has done like a dance to kind of distract everybody so that Alba and Clara can get Lena out.
Right, because she knows as soon as Salim's mom finds out that Rhea is dancing
Hmm.
for the wedding party before she's supposed to, that mom is going to freak out and go down there to put a stop to it. And
Right,
that leaves Lena exposed. She
right,
still has an armed guard outside of her room
right.
to get by.
The armed guard outside the room, what I don't get, I mean, I do get that Lena's parents are just thrilled that she's getting married, but like, don't you think it's weird that there's an armed guard
Yeah,
outside your daughter's
exactly.
room?
Yep. And not letting her out or anybody else in.
Because it's just so clear at this point that Rahila, is trying to lock her down and make sure that this wedding goes
Yeah,
through.
they're just like, oh, she's really traditional. The bride cannot see anybody before the wedding.
It turns out then, so Lena's in the cart. She's been chloroformed. She's out cold. Alba and Clara are about to get away. And it turns out that the plan is to use Lena's womb to create a clone of Rahila so she can have the life she always wanted that was basically ruined by having to get married when she was young.
So this is kind of like the time paradox.
Yeah.
If you think about this too hard, it falls apart
Yes.
because it's not Rahila, evil mom, as I call her,
Yes.
herself. It's a clone of her.
Yes.
So it's not her consciousness. It's a
Right.
second person's consciousness. She's saying that it's a way for me to be immortal, but it's not her. She's still is not going to be immortal. She's never going to see her dreams fulfilled. It's only through this other being that's going to be an infant. And she'll be
Yes.
long dead and gone by the time this person is an adult. So it's sketchy. That's it.
Yes.
That's what the evil plan is. And apparently this killed the first wife.
They get the gun off of the armed guard, and Rhea comes down and very dramatically breaks up the wedding. And again, people still think she's crazy.
Because she's firing into the ceiling with a
She's
gun from the
firing to
guard.
the ceiling. She's saying that, Rahila is going to turn herself into a clone and be implanted in Lena's womb, and everybody's laughing at her. And then Lena has this moment of clarity where she remembers Salim experimenting on her. And she's like, wait a second, this is real. And then Salim talks about his first wife who died because she was weak, but that Lena has a magnificent womb. He's never seen one like that before. And she's like, hell no.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's when the girl's parents get involved. Her mom hits Rahila in the head with a chair.
And
It
this is
turns,
cathartic for the mom. She's towing the line behind Salim's mom.
yeah,
So to see her knock out the bad mom is cathartic.
yeah. So then there's a free-for-all, which is actually strangely beautiful because you see all these people in their wedding finery fighting. You see all the dresses spinning around as they're fighting. It's really kind of some really beautiful choreography here, fight choreography of the girls in their dresses. They're just about to get away. When of course Rahila is standing by the car as they're about to escape, Rhea and Lena. Rhea finally executes her kick.
Because it takes the anger of what Rahia, the bad mom, tells her.
Yeah.
Like, silly girl with silly ideals. You're a
Yeah.
waste of human life, your big dreams, just putting her down. And
Yeah.
that is enough for Rhea to master the spinning kick.
And Lena has quite a cathartic moment where she kicks Salim, I think, until his ribs are broken,
Yep.
and says, I think one of the best lines in the movie, I may have a magnificent womb, but your is distinctly average.
It ends once again with Lena filming Rhea.
Hmm.
The fury, the reverse
Yeah.
kick.
Yes.
Yeah. So things
After
are back to normal.
Yes. After she's gotten her invitation from Eunice to have brunch So she's so excited.
They're
Um,
chanting brunch, brunch, brunch at the end of the movie. Yep.
So Nita Manzoor started writing this movie actually about 10 years ago. She said, as she went through different stages of trying to pitch this, she said, first, almost inevitably, some executives wanted her to change it to a white family so that it would be more palatable to the general public. Um, or she said she got notes at one point where they wanted it to be a forced marriage because then there would be more trauma because there was this idea that a Muslim girl has to have trauma. Um, and of course, she didn't want any of those things, you know. So she kind of waited and she made We Are Lady parts and until she could get to a point where she could actually kind of make the movie that she wanted to make. She herself studied karate as she was growing up, and she did cite Get Out as an influence because she said it made her believe in like the possibilities of cinema. I do think Get Out opened a lot of doors for people, because it was such a financially successful movie. It allowed, more people to make the kinds of movies that they wanted to allow, studios to take chances on these kinds of movies.
Yeah, and we haven't really talked about the actors themselves,
Hmm.
but Priya Kansara as
Hmm.
Rhea is amazing in this
Yes.
because the whole movie is on her shoulders. Even though it's
Hmm.
a movie about the two sisters, it really focuses on her. And she really brings you through and you really get behind her. You never think, that she's too much or that she's in fact crazy. You're with her, even when you're thinking, is she or is she not imagining this? She's likable enough that she carries you through. So I think she does an amazing job.
Yeah, I think everyone's like really well cast in this movie. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that, and I love, 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 love the two actresses who play her friends. They are both fantastic. Again, like the chemistry is really real, just like with the chemistry between Rhea and Lena, which feels like a real sister relationship. The chemistry between the three friends feels like a real friendship.
Yeah, a really good movie. And again, if you're not prepared for what you're about to see, it's quite a surprise as to, again, the martial arts, the sci-fi aspect, the nefarious plot. So it's more than just what it seems. If we're about to give buckets on this, out of 5 buckets, if I gave Get Out 4, this is close. I'm gonna go 3.5. I really liked it. The suspense aspect of it, like, is Rhea crazy or not? I love the performances, and I think comedically it really delivers. So 3.5.
And I'm gonna go the same as Get Out. I'm gonna say it's a 4.
Ooh, you're gonna
Yeah.
equal it to Get Out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've actually watched this 3 times now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really enjoy this. I think it's still fun, on successive viewings.
Nice. All right. So, 2 hearty recommendations. If you haven't seen Get Out or Polite Society, shame on you if you're still listening to this.
Yeah, really.
But
You do. I hate the idea of people going into either of these movies,
knowing what's
knowing
going
what's
to
coming.
occur.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what else did we do this week?
Well, I did 2 things.
All right.
So one of the things I did was I saw Nope on 70 millimeter. And I just wanted to bring this up because it was apparently a special print that was created for awards season. So it was actually made after the film's initial release. This print is beautiful. Um, and seeing this film again on the big screen with a receptive audience that sort of laughed in the right places and gasped in the right places, it was such a great experience. I know I say this all the time. Go to see movies in the theater. That's how they're meant to be seen. It's such a rewarding experience. But the second thing I did was I went to the theater to see They Cloned Tyrone. So this is a Netflix film that's in limited release in the theater, and I think it's actually going to be on Netflix next week.
Okay.
But could not wait that long. My whole family, we were all like, nope, we can't wait till next week. We need to go now. John Boyega, Tiana Paris and Jamie Foxx as respectively a drug dealer, a hooker, and a pimp. Whatever you think this movie is not what this movie is about. This film really, I actually watched this and thought, I wish almost it could have been a third feature to go with these two films. It has a wild premise at the center of this film, which I'm not gonna get into because it will ruin it. But when this is out on Netflix next week, you should watch it. It
Wow. Okay.
is great.
They cloned Tyrone.
They cloned Tyrone. It has a beautiful, I'm not sure if they used film or if they just made it look kind of lo-fi and grainy. It has some really obvious blaxploitation influences, and it is just so good. It's so good. So good. Really enjoyed it.
What I did, another week, more crappy horror movies for me. But so I'm not going to go into any of those, though. The highlight for me was getting in the mail a special Blu-ray 5.1 Super Audio remix of the very first album from Suede from 1993. There's a website company, call it what you want, called Super Deluxe Edition. So if you go to superdeluxeedition.com, they not only have reviews of, box sets that bands and artists put out of their classic albums, but they also have an in-house employees or engineers or what have you that remix albums themselves. So they have a limited edition series, and Suede being number 11, and they're all the ones that came before it are already out of stock. So I picked up on this as soon as it got announced. So I put a pre-order in April. So I don't know if it's still available or not. But when you put it in this thing, and I am a 5.1 connoisseur, so I will sit there just like I was 16 years old again, listening to an album back to front with my headphones on. I'll sit there in the middle of my living room, right in the dead center of the room, so everything is around me perfectly, the 5 speakers. And I put it on from beginning to end, and it was just revelatory because I know this album inside and out. I've listened to it countless times, being a huge Anglophile. And so I was on top of Suede like the minute that they came out. But this album, like you can hear Bernard Butler's guitar with such clarity just because of the separation. You could hear backing vocals that you've never noticed before. There's instrumentation that you never noticed before. Just the whole of it is a brand new listening experience. And now that I have this album, I am just so petitioning them to do Dogman Star, which is the second
my
Suede
favorite
album. Because now, if any album would gain from a 5.1 mix, it would be that one. But
I think all of my favorite Suede songs are on
that album.
Star. Yeah, I love like We Are the Pigs, The Two of Us, Still Life, like so many songs.
Oh yeah. That is my favorite Suede album as well. And not to take anything away from their debut album.
Yeah.
But because it was its 30th anniversary this year, that's why Super Deluxe Edition did this. And next year is Dogman Star's 30th anniversary, so perhaps they'll do it. So now I'm on this website's mailing list, so I am going to know when anything and everything comes out that they're working on. I think currently the latest one is ABC's The Lexicon of Love, which has Poison Arrow and The Look of Love, and that's a classic album in itself.
Poison Arrow. Oh, I love that song.
Yep. So they've done a 5.1 mix of that album. And it looks like they come out with a couple a year. So it's possible. I've already sent them an email. Please do Dogman Star. So we'll see.
You're like Rhea going, please.
Yeah.
Please.
Again, I don't know if the Suede album that's out now, that's remixed from Super Deluxe Edition, is sold out because it was a limited edition. But if you're a Suede fan, go to the website right now. Maybe they've still got a few copies. Who knows? That's what I did this week. So now next week.
Yeah.
It's a huge week in terms of movie releases. As many people have joked, this is going to be an Oppenheimer Barbie weekend next weekend.
It is for me.
It is for you. It's not going to be for me because I'm not going to be able to see either of them next weekend. Hence, next week we're doing a 5-bucket episode.
Mm-hmm.
We are doing Oppenheimer. We're just pushing that off 1 week. So fear not. And eventually we will do Barbie. But next week we are doing a 5-bucket, and this is your choice.
Yep.
But it's a movie that I think is near and dear to all three of us.
Yes, we're doing The Black Stallion.
I can't wait to see this again.
If you haven't watched this in a long time, I think, especially if you haven't seen it since you were a kid,
Yeah.
I just think your experience as an adult is going to be, I just feel like it's going to be so emotional. You know, obviously, I'm going to have a lot to say about this next week. This is, my 5-bucket. It's one of my favorites. I watch it at least once a year, and there is a very, very beautiful Criterion Blu-ray available. It doesn't have a ton of special features. It has some. It doesn't have a ton of special features, but really, it's just that you want to see that really beautiful cleaned up print.
And unfortunately, I looked at my library. They only have the DVD. DVD.
DVD.
Jeff does have access to the Blu-ray that you're talking about, so I'm going to have to go to streaming because I want to see it in the most pristine quality that I can.
Yeah, in the Criterion. I mean, Criterion always does a beautiful job of everything. I actually just got the Criterion edition of Thelma and Louise.
Oh,
It just came out maybe a month ago it came out, I think. But I just got it. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, so I'm really curious to see what they've done with that box set.
well, that's next week. So please come back.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we've got some Black Stallion fans out there
Yeah.
that'll be very excited.
And if not, come back and see why you should love and appreciate this beautiful movie.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So thanks for listening, as always.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, everybody. If you like what you just heard, be sure to follow TMI Confessionals of the Nerd Kind on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or whatever you listen to your favorite podcasts on. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and then share it with your fellow movie nerd friends. It means the world to us and helps our listenership grow.
You can also find us on all of the socials, Instagram and Twitter at TMI_podcast 2018. We're on Facebook and YouTube as well. Just look for the Popcorn Bucket.
You can help support this show by visiting our TeePublic page for some TMI branded goodies such as hoodies, t-shirts, mugs, and stickers. TeePublic.com/TMI Confessionals, all one word.
A 5-star review would be incredibly nice as well. I'm just saying.
Thanks again for listening. We truly appreciate you. Be sure to come back next week. We'll save some popcorn for you. Okay. I'm ready to go.